In a small, dusty town on the edge of a vast desert, there lived a young girl named Emily. She was a child of the land, born into a family that struggled with every breath they took. The town, called Raven's Hollow, was not much more than a few scattered houses and dirt roads, with a population of people who barely got by. Emily's family was no different. Her father, a hard-working farmer, had worked the land for as long as anyone could remember, but no matter how much he toiled, there was never enough. The soil was dry, the rains scarce, and every season seemed to bring more hardship. Emily's mother, Martha, was a quiet woman with kind eyes. She always did her best to keep a smile on her face even when things seemed impossible. But life had taken a toll on her. She had been young when she married, dreaming of a life of love and family. However, over the years, the dream slowly faded as the weight of poverty took its place. Martha worked tirelessly to keep the house in order, but the struggle never seemed to end. The bills piled up, and the debts increased. Still, they managed to survive, if only just. Emily, despite the difficult circumstances, was a bright and cheerful girl. She would spend her days helping her mother with chores, picking herbs in the garden and running errands in the small town. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity and hope. Even though her family's future seemed uncertain, she loved the world around her, the open sky above and the green hills that stretched far in the distance. Yet she knew that her family's life was fragile. They had no money, no real land, and no future beyond the dusty roads of Raven's Hollow. One late afternoon, everything changed. It was the middle of summer, and the heat was unbearable. The sun hung high in the sky, casting long shadows over the dry fields. Emily's father, Henry, had been out in the fields all morning trying to gather what little he could from the crops. His face was sunburned, and his hands were calloused from years of hard work. Emily had just returned from the town market when she noticed the look on her father's face as he sat on the porch. His head in his hands. Something was wrong. Her mother was inside, speaking quietly to someone Emily couldn't see. The air was thick with tension. Emily stood in the doorway, watching her father as he wiped his brow with the back of his hand. She didn't know it then, but her father's world was about to crumble. "I'm sorry, Henry," Emily heard her mother say. Her voice was shaky, strained. "There's nothing more we can do." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had never heard her mother sound so defeated. Slowly she approached the porch, but her father did not look up. "Papa?" Emily whispered, her voice soft. Her father raised his head, and for a moment Emily saw the fear in his eyes. It was the kind of fear she had never seen before, a fear that spoke of something deep and troubling. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself before speaking. "Emily, we can't make it anymore. The debts are too much. I don't know how much longer we can survive this way." Emily's mind raced. Her father was always strong, always the rock of their family. But today she saw him for what he was, a man who had reached the end of his rope. He stood up slowly, his legs unsteady, and walked toward her. He knelt down, placing his hands on her shoulders. "I don't want you to worry, my dear," he said, his voice gentle but filled with sorrow. "I've tried everything I can, but sometimes things just don't work out." Emily swallowed hard, trying to understand what was happening. She could feel her chest tightening with fear, but she didn't know what she was afraid of. Her mother appeared at the door, her eyes swollen from crying. "Henry, you need to talk to him. He's come to make an offer. We don't have a choice." Before Emily could ask any more questions, a man appeared on the road riding a tall horse. He was dressed in fine clothes with a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face. Emily recognized him immediately as Jasper, a wealthy landowner who had recently moved into the area. Jasper had made his fortune in various ways, always looking for opportunities to expand his holdings no matter the cost. Jasper dismounted from his horse and walked toward them. He was a tall man with a sharp jaw and cold eyes. He had a reputation for being ruthless in business dealings, and most people in Raven's Hollow avoided him whenever they could. But today he had come to make an offer that would change Emily's life forever. "I hear you're in trouble," Jasper said, his voice smooth and calm. "I've been watching your situation for some time. I've been thinking about a way I could help you out." Emily's mother stiffened, but her father's face remained blank. They both knew that any offer from Jasper came with a price. "I'm willing to buy your daughter, Emily," Jasper continued, his voice cold and businesslike. "I'll take her off your hands, and in return I'll clear your debts. I'll even pay you a few pennies to make the deal official." Emily's heart raced as she listened to the words. Her mind went numb, and for a moment she couldn't understand what was happening. Her mother's face turned pale and her father looked away. "Please," Jasper said, "I can offer you a way out. You won't have to worry about money anymore. You won't have to live like this." Emily felt her world begin to crumble around her. She wanted to scream, to run away, to refuse his offer, but she could see the desperation in her mother's eyes. Emily's family was trapped. There was no other choice. And just like that, the world she knew, the world of warmth, love, and safety, was slipping through her fingers. Her mother looked down at Emily, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I'm sorry, Emily, I have no other choice." Jasper smiled, the deal sealed. Emily stood there, her heart broken, as she realized that her life as she knew it was over. Emily's new life began on the morning she was led away from her home. It was a cool, overcast day, with the promise of rain hanging in the air. Emily's heart beat wildly in her chest as she walked behind Jasper, her legs heavy and her mind clouded with confusion. She had no idea where she was going or what would happen next. But she knew one thing for sure. Her life was no longer her own. The house she had called home was quickly fading behind her. The small cottage with its crooked windows and fading paint, now just a distant memory. Her mother and father stood by the door, their faces drawn and tired, unable to stop the inevitable. Emily's mother, her eyes wet with tears, had whispered one last time, "Be strong, Emily, you must be strong." But strength was a heavy thing to carry, especially when it was forced upon a young girl who did not understand the world's cruelty. As they walked down the dirt path leading away from her home, Emily cast one last glance at the small garden her mother had lovingly tended to over the years. The flowers were now wilting, their bright colors fading under the harsh sun. Emily tried to memorize the picture, her mother bending over the flower beds, her face filled with peace, but the image was already slipping away, just like her past. Jasper's ranch was located on the outskirts of the town, surrounded by endless fields of dry, cracked earth. The land stretched for miles, with nothing but the occasional cactus or scraggly tree breaking up the monotonous landscape. It was a place where life was hard, and survival was a daily struggle. The ranch house was a large old building made of wood and stone. It stood tall against the barren horizon, its windows dark and lifeless. When they arrived, Jasper led Emily inside, his steps heavy as he opened the door. The moment she stepped across the threshold, Emily felt the weight of the place settle over her like a thick fog. It was cold, quiet, and smelled of dust and neglect. Jasper took her to a small room near the back of the house. It was sparsely furnished with only a single bed, a wooden chair, and a small table. The floor was bare and the walls were cracked, with only a few faded photographs hanging crookedly. Emily looked around, trying to take in her new reality, but nothing made sense. "You'll stay here," Jasper said gruffly, his voice cold. "You'll help with the chores around the ranch. No questions. No complaints. Do as you're told, and you'll have food and shelter. Fail to obey and you'll regret it." Emily nodded silently, her throat tight, but her mind was racing. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew this wasn't a place for someone like her. The harshness in Jasper's voice made her shiver, and she quickly looked down at her feet, afraid to meet his eyes. Jasper turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. Emily was left alone in the small, dim room, the silence pressing down on her. She sat down on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling. It was hard to breathe in this new world. It felt wrong, everything about it felt wrong. But she had no choice. There was no way back. The next few days passed in a blur. Jasper kept her busy with hard labor, tasks that drained her body and spirit. Every morning she was expected to rise before dawn, helping with the animals and cleaning the ranch. There were chickens to feed, horses to brush, and the constant need to mend fences or fix broken equipment. The work was unrelenting, and the days seemed to stretch on forever. At first, Emily's hands were blistered and raw from the chores. Her back ached from hours of bending over, scrubbing or carrying heavy loads, but no one seemed to notice her pain. Jasper had no patience for weakness, and the workers at the ranch barely spoke to her. They had their own struggles to face, and the last thing they had time for was a girl who was new to the life they led. One evening, after a particularly long day, Emily collapsed onto the bed, her body sore and exhausted. The room was dark, and the only sound was the wind rattling the windows. She stared up at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Her mind raced with thoughts of home, of her mother's soft voice, of the smell of bread baking in the oven, of the small joys that once filled her life. Now, all that seemed so far away, like a dream that had slipped through her fingers. The next morning, as she was cleaning out the barn, Emily noticed a group of workers gathered in the corner of the yard. They were talking in hushed voices, their faces tense. At first, she thought nothing of it, but then she heard the name Jasper mentioned. She moved closer, trying to hear more, but as soon as they saw her, the conversation stopped. The workers quickly went back to their tasks, but one of them, a man with graying hair named Thomas, gave Emily a brief, sympathetic glance. Emily had heard little about the workers on the ranch. Most of them kept to themselves, their faces hard and their lives marked by years of tough labor. But she could tell that Thomas was different. There was a quiet sadness in his eyes, as though he had seen too much and had given up on hope long ago. One afternoon, as Emily was carrying a bucket of water to the horses, she found Thomas standing by the corral. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the land. He looked up at her as she approached, his face softening for a moment. "You're new here," Thomas said, his voice low but kind. "Don't let him break you. You'll survive if you keep your head down and keep working." Emily nodded, not sure what to say. She had no idea what he meant by "don't let him break you," but she had a sinking feeling that she was beginning to understand. The ranch wasn't a place for kindness. It was a place where strength was measured by how much you could endure, not by how much you could care. Days turned into weeks, and Emily learned to survive in her new world. She kept her head down, did her work without complaint, and tried her best to stay out of Jasper's way. The other workers remained distant, but occasionally, Thomas would offer her a quiet word of encouragement, reminding her to keep going, to keep holding on. But despite everything, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air in the ranch house was thick with tension, and the weight of the land itself seemed to press down on her, making her feel smaller with each passing day. And so, Emily endured. She worked through the pain, through the loneliness, and through the fear. She held on to the memory of her family, the warmth of her mother's touch, and the hope that one day she would find a way out. As the weeks turned into months, Emily began to understand the true nature of the ranch. It was a place built on sweat, hardship, and the unspoken rule that only the strongest would survive. The sun beat down relentlessly during the day, and the cold desert winds would chill the air at night. But through all of it, the ranch never stopped. There was always something to be done, always someone to be worked until they could do no more. Jasper, the ranch owner, rarely showed his face unless it was to give an order or remind everyone of his control over their lives. He kept to himself for the most part, but when he did appear, his presence was like a dark cloud. He would walk through the ranch, his boots clicking against the hard ground, inspecting every detail as if it were a matter of life and death. His eyes would scan the workers, his gaze sharp and cold. He didn't need to say much. His silence was enough to make everyone nervous. Emily soon learned that Jasper ruled the ranch with a strict hand. His orders were law, and there was no room for questioning. Every day was a test of endurance. Whether it was shoveling hay, cleaning out stables, or mending fences, Emily's hands ached by the end of the day. The physical labor was exhausting, but it was the emotional toll that was harder to bear. Jasper had a way of making everyone feel small, insignificant. He never spoke a kind word. His gaze was always calculating, like he was looking for a reason to punish someone. Emily couldn't count the number of times she had been scolded for small mistakes, whether it was a bucket of water spilled or a missed nail in the fence. The punishment was always swift and harsh. There were no second chances. It wasn't long before Emily realized that Jasper's cruelty went beyond the work. He enjoyed seeing the workers suffer, enjoyed making them feel weak and powerless. He would take every opportunity to remind them of how much control he had. One afternoon, Emily was working in the barn when she accidentally dropped a stack of hay bales. The noise echoed through the building, drawing Jasper's attention. He appeared at the doorway, his face shadowed in the dim light of the barn. Without a word, he walked toward her, his boots heavy with each step. "You're clumsy, girl," he said, his voice cold as ice. "This is not the first time you've made a mistake. How many more will you have?" Emily froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew what was coming. She had seen it happen to others before. Jasper didn't tolerate mistakes. He didn't tolerate weakness. "I'm sorry, sir," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "It won't happen again." "Sorry doesn't fix anything," Jasper replied with a sneer. "You'll learn the consequences of your carelessness." With a swift motion, he grabbed her arm and dragged her to the back of the barn. Emily's heart raced, fear twisting in her stomach. She tried to pull away, but his grip was too strong. His fingers dug into her skin, his face twisted with anger. "You think you can get away with everything just because you're new?" he growled. "Let's see if you're really as strong as you think you are." Before Emily could react, Jasper pushed her to the ground, his hand pressing against her chest. She gasped for breath, trying to push him off, but it was no use. He was much stronger. The weight of his presence felt like a mountain, crushing her under its force. For a moment, she thought she might not be able to breathe at all. But then, just as quickly as he had thrown her to the ground, Jasper stepped back. His cold gaze never left her face. "Get up," he said, his voice still icy. "If you can't even do the simplest tasks, maybe you don't belong here." Emily slowly pushed herself up, her hands trembling. She could feel the sting of his grip on her arm, but there was no time to dwell on it. There was always more work to do, always more demands to meet. She had learned by now that in this world, weakness would get you nowhere. Over time, Emily learned how to navigate the ranch, how to keep her head down and avoid attracting too much attention. She worked harder than anyone else, trying to prove herself, trying to survive. But no matter how hard she tried, it was never enough for Jasper. Every day there was a new task, a new expectation. Every mistake was met with scorn. Every moment of exhaustion was ignored. But Emily was not the only one who suffered under Jasper's rule. The other workers were just as beaten down, just as afraid. Many of them had been on the ranch for years, stuck in a life they couldn't escape. The older workers, like Thomas, tried to help when they could, offering small bits of advice or words of encouragement when Jasper wasn't around. But even they were limited in what they could do. It was in these quiet moments, away from Jasper's watchful eye, that Emily began to understand the true cost of living on the ranch. The workers were trapped, their lives stolen from them one day at a time. They were like ghosts, their faces hollow, their voices barely a whisper. Emily could see the toll the years had taken on them, both physically and emotionally. They had long since lost any hope of freedom, any hope of escape. One evening, after another grueling day of work, Emily sat on the porch of her small room, staring out at the darkening sky. She had been in this place for months now, and yet it still felt like a dream she couldn't wake up from. The isolation, the cruelty, it was all too much to bear. But through it all, one thing had remained constant: her determination. Emily's heart burned with the desire to break free, to escape the life that had been forced upon her. She knew it wouldn't be easy, and she knew it would take time. But every day she worked, every day she endured, the fire within her grew stronger. There had to be a way out. There had to be something more than this life of endless labor and constant fear. And as the days passed, Emily's resolve grew. She would not let Jasper break her. She would survive no matter what it took. She would find a way to escape the ranch, and she would return to the life she had lost, even if it meant fighting for her freedom with everything she had. The ranch might have been his, but Emily's spirit would never belong to Jasper. As the months dragged on, Emily's world continued to revolve around the endless tasks at the ranch. It seemed there was always something to fix, something to clean, or something to care for. Day after day, she lived in a haze of exhaustion, her body constantly aching, her mind always searching for a way out. But the walls of the ranch seemed to close in tighter with each passing day. Jasper's cold control over the land and its workers felt absolute. Emily tried to keep her head down, working as hard as she could to avoid drawing attention. But every so often she would catch glimpses of something more. Small, fleeting moments when the workers would whisper to each other in the shadows, or when Thomas, the older ranch hand, would glance at her with an unreadable expression. It was in those moments that Emily would feel a spark of hope, like there might still be a way to escape this prison. One evening, as Emily was finishing up her chores in the barn, she overheard a conversation that would change everything. She had been cleaning out the hayloft, stacking the bales into neat piles when she heard two of the ranch hands talking quietly outside. Their voices were low, but Emily could make out the words clearly. "Jasper's been losing money," one of them said. "The ranch is in trouble. The crops are failing and his investments are falling apart." Emily's ears perked up at the mention of Jasper's struggles. The man continued, unaware that Emily was listening. Seems like there's a big auction coming up soon. Jasper's been talking about selling some of the land to cover his losses. The second man spoke, his tone cautious. You think he'll sell the ranch? I can't imagine it. He's put so much into it. I don't know, the first man replied. But I've heard whispers. Things are looking bad for him. There's a chance this place might change hands. Emily's heart raced as she listened. She had always known Jasper was ruthless, but hearing that his control over the ranch might be slipping gave her a glimmer of hope. She had always been told that when the land was sold, the workers would be out of a job, but now it seemed there might be a chance for someone else to take over, and maybe that someone would be kinder than Jasper. The men continued talking, but Emily could no longer concentrate. The thought of the ranch changing hands filled her with a mix of excitement and fear. If the ranch was sold, would she finally be free? Or would things get worse? The next few days passed in a blur of work, but Emily's thoughts remained focused on what she had overheard. She knew that if Jasper's finances were in trouble, there was a chance, just a small chance, that she could escape. But she didn't know who would buy the ranch or if that would even lead to freedom. She had to wait and see. It wasn't until one rainy evening, when the ranch was unusually quiet, that Emily got the chance to speak to Thomas. She had been out in the fields helping to bring in the last of the cattle when the storm hit, soaking her to the bone. She was shivering as she hurried to the barn to find shelter from the rain, but she noticed Thomas standing near the corral, staring out into the storm. She approached him cautiously, unsure of what to say. He looked up as she drew near, his eyes soft with recognition. You should be inside out of the rain, he said, his voice warm despite the cold. You'll catch a chill. I couldn't, Emily replied, shaking her head. I've still got work to do, but I overheard something today. About Jasper. Do you think it's true? That he's losing money? Thomas sighed deeply, his face hardening. It's true. Things haven't been good for him lately. He's been borrowing money from every source he can find, but it's not enough. This ranch isn't bringing in what it used to. Emily's heart quickened. So it's possible the ranch could be sold. Thomas gave her a long look, as though weighing his words carefully. It's possible. Jasper's pride won't let him go down without a fight, but the auction is coming. It could mean a lot of things for the workers here. We could be looking at new owners, or we could just lose everything. Emily's mind raced. If the ranch was sold, there was a chance she could escape. But what would the new owner be like? Would they be just as cruel as Jasper? Would they care about the workers? Thomas seemed to sense her uncertainty. I don't know what will happen, but if you're thinking about leaving, now's the time to start making plans. Those words lingered in Emily's mind long after she had returned to her room. She spent the following days carefully considering her options. The thought of leaving the ranch, of stepping out into the world beyond the fences, filled her with both fear and excitement. She had spent so many months simply surviving, not daring to dream of something more. But now, the possibility of freedom was within her reach. As the days passed, Emily began to notice small changes in the atmosphere around the ranch. The workers were talking more openly about the upcoming auction, sharing rumors and speculating about who might buy the land. Some of them, especially the older hands, seemed resigned to the idea that nothing would change. But others, like Thomas, talked about the possibility of a new owner who might bring a fresh start. It was a hope, fragile but alive, that kept them going. Then one afternoon, as Emily was working near the ranch house, she saw Jasper in a rare moment of vulnerability. He was sitting on the porch, his face drawn and tired, staring out at the land. For a moment, he looked less like a cruel, powerful man, and more like someone who had lost control of his life. Emily had never seen him like this before. His usual arrogance and coldness seemed to have melted away. She couldn't help but feel a strange sense of pity for him. But then, as quickly as the feeling came, she pushed it aside. She had suffered enough under his rule. The thought of pitying him seemed impossible. No matter what he was going through, he had brought this upon himself. That night, as the auction drew closer, Emily couldn't sleep. Her mind was filled with questions, uncertainties about the future and fears about what might happen next. But one thing was clear. The chance for her freedom was finally within reach. She would not waste it. The next morning, Emily met Thomas by the barn. The sky was clear, and the air was filled with the sounds of the animals and the distant rumble of the auction preparations. You ready? Thomas asked softly, his eyes serious. Emily nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. I don't know what will happen, but I have to try. I can't stay here anymore. Thomas gave her a small, understanding smile. Then you'll need to be ready. If this place changes hands, you'll need to make your move quickly. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she nodded. The moment was finally here, the chance she had been waiting for. Whatever the future held, she knew one thing. She would not let fear stop her now. She was ready to fight for her freedom, and in that moment Emily understood that no matter what came next, she would face it with the strength she had found deep inside herself. The morning of the auction arrived with a heavy stillness in the air. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the ranch as Emily made her way to the barn. She had spent the entire night thinking, preparing herself for what could be the most important moment of her life. Her heart pounded with anticipation, fear, and hope. She knew that today, everything could change. The ranch was buzzing with activity. The workers were going about their tasks, but there was a sense of unease in the air. They all knew that the auction would decide the future of the land, of their lives. For many of them, this was just another day in the endless cycle of hard labor and hopelessness. But for Emily, today felt different. Today she had a chance, maybe the only chance, at freedom. As she worked, she kept her eyes on the road, watching for any sign of the men who would come to bid on the ranch. The workers spoke in hushed voices, some of them hopeful, others resigned. It seemed like no one knew exactly what would happen, but everyone was waiting for the moment the auction began. Emily hadn't heard from Thomas since the night before, but she knew he had his plans. He had told her to be ready, to seize the moment if the opportunity came. It was strange to think that after all the hardship, after all the cruelty she had endured, she was now in a position to escape. But the fear of the unknown was still there, and it gnawed at her. What if the new owner was just like Jasper? What if nothing changed? She tried to push the fear aside. Today wasn't just about getting away. It was about reclaiming her life. She had spent far too long living in the shadows, too long following orders. Now, for the first time, she had the chance to choose her own path. As the day wore on, the workers began to gather near the ranch house, where the auction was to take place. Emily took a deep breath and walked slowly toward the crowd, her eyes scanning the faces of the men who had come to bid. Some of them were wealthy landowners from nearby towns, while others looked like they were simply hoping to buy land at a bargain. Emily didn't know much about these men, but she had a sinking feeling in her stomach. Would they be kind to the workers, or would they exploit them just as Jasper had? Her heart skipped a beat as she saw him. Thomas. He was standing near the edge of the crowd, his weathered face as calm as ever. He nodded at her when he noticed her approach. She walked toward him, her legs feeling heavy as though the weight of the moment was too much to bear. "They're starting soon," Thomas said quietly, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "Are you ready?" Emily took a deep breath and nodded. "I think so. I don't know what will happen next, but I'm not going to stand by and watch this place destroy me anymore." Thomas gave her a small, approving smile. "You've come a long way, Emily. I'm proud of you. Whatever happens today, you've made it this far. Don't forget that." His words gave her strength, but the uncertainty of the situation still loomed over her. Emily could feel the weight of every decision, every step she had taken to get to this moment. She had survived Jasper's cruelty, endured the long, hard days at the ranch, and fought to hold on to her sense of self. But now it was time to face the unknown. Suddenly, there was a shout. The auction had begun. Emily's heart raced as she followed Thomas toward the auction area. The ranch house was surrounded by bidders and workers, all gathered in a circle. Jasper was standing at the front, looking more tired and worn than Emily had ever seen him. His usual confidence had faded, replaced by a desperate edge. He looked like a man who knew he was about to lose everything. The auctioneer, a tall man in a dark suit, stepped forward and raised his hand to silence the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer called, his voice carrying across the open space. "Welcome to the sale of Jasper's Hollow Ranch. This land has been in the family for generations, but due to financial struggles, Mr. Jasper Green has been forced to sell. We will begin with the land itself, followed by any remaining assets. I trust everyone here is ready to make their bids." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine as the bidding began. The ranch was being sold, but what would happen to the workers who had spent their lives here? Would they be thrown out, left to wander without a place to go? Would the new owner show them the same cruelty that Jasper had? The thought made her stomach turn. The bids went back and forth, the auctioneer's voice steady as the prices climbed higher and higher. Emily stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, her eyes focused on the men who were bidding. She didn't know what to think. Everything seemed out of her control. She felt powerless standing there as the future of her life was decided by strangers. Then, just as Emily was beginning to lose hope, something unexpected happened. A quiet voice called from behind the crowd. "I'll bid." The voice was calm, firm, but it wasn't one of the wealthy landowners who had been bidding. It was Thomas. Emily's eyes widened in surprise as he stepped forward, his face unreadable. He raised his hand, signaling to the auctioneer. "I'll bid on the land," he said, his voice steady and unwavering. The auctioneer hesitated for a moment, clearly surprised by the sudden appearance of an unexpected bidder. The crowd fell silent as Thomas made his way to the front, standing beside Jasper, who seemed taken aback by the turn of events. "You?" Jasper sneered. "You think you can buy this land?" Thomas didn't flinch. "I've been here long enough to know how this place should be run, and I'm willing to take it off your hands." Emily's heart raced as she watched Thomas, unsure of what he was doing. Was he really going to buy the ranch? Could he actually save them? The auctioneer, still unsure, looked at the other bidders. "Do we have any further bids?" One of the men from the crowd stepped forward. "I'll match it," he said, clearly ready to bid higher. But Thomas wasn't finished. He stepped forward again, raising his hand. "I'll go higher," he said, his voice calm but firm. The bidding war continued for what felt like an eternity, but in the end, Thomas stood tall, his bid the highest. The auctioneer's gavel struck down and the sale was made. "I've bought the land," Thomas said quietly, turning to face Emily. "It's ours now, and it's not going to be run like it was before. This ranch will be a place of hard work, yes, but also of respect. No one here will be treated the way Jasper treated you." For the first time in what felt like forever, Emily allowed herself to breathe. The weight that had been pressing on her chest seemed to lift, and the horizon stretched out before her, full of possibilities. She smiled, feeling something inside her shift. She had been sold for pennies, forced to live a life she didn't choose, but now she was free. And the ranch, this place that had once been a symbol of cruelty, would be a place of hope, of new beginnings. Thomas had raised his hand not just to bid on land, but to offer a future. And Emily, for the first time in years, believed in that future.